Hey guys, my name is Colson Rosa, and welcome back to Seraphim Stories. So I wanted to give you guys another update on how my life as an author has been going, and I also wanted to talk to you about editing a little bit, but more specifically about some of my highs and lows throughout this journey of writing Sentinels Underground. So, as I've let you guys know, since quarantine started, I've been writing the third book in my sci-fi superhero series, The Sentinels. And before I mention some of the progress that I've been having with that book, I first want to talk about Sentinels Scarlet Alliance, which is the second book in the series. Now, it's currently going through editing, and this process can be very challenging and very hard at times, but it's also very rewarding as you see your rough draft turn into a final draft. It gets processed, it gets refined, almost like a diamond that once it's been made, it needs to be cut, it needs to be polished, it needs to be presented in the best light possible. Now, editing can be a very long process as you need to go by chapter, paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence. Look not only at the grammar, but search out for plot holes, almost like a detective looking at your case. You need to be aware of your biases and tendencies as an author, maybe getting some second opinions on the rough draft from some people that don't mind a couple spoilers, and really talking them through the plot line. Why did you take this grand narrative? Why did you decide to send these kind of trials at the characters? What scenes maybe need to be cut down? What scenes could be added upon? Is the rough draft overall shorter than you were expecting or longer than you were expecting? If you're writing a children's book, you may want to have the pages a lot shorter. You may want to have the formatting so the words are a lot larger and maybe pictures are included. But if you're writing a different kind of story, you can get away with more pages, a more well thought out, drawn out, developed adventure where you really get to see the characters thrive. That's why some fans of Lord of the Rings are so adamant about their love of the extended editions, because they want to see the entire thing. They don't want anything cut. They want the full sweeping narrative, and they want their eyes to be open to so much more of Tolkien's world that he's created with Middle-earth. And I think while editing Sentinels Scarlet Alliance, I've come to realize that this is one of my most ambitious and complex books that I've ever written, because it deals with a lot of different subplots that all then tie into the main narrative, and it has a lot of different moving parts, which I think can make it really fascinating if it's properly designed and refined down to its core elements. Because having that many moving mechanics can make it a really complicated story. And I don't want to scare or shock my reader by forcing them to try to get it all straight in their heads. But also, I have enough faith and trust in my reader that I don't need to hold their hand the entire way. I know there's a lot of brilliant people out there who, when they read this book, they're really going to be able to soak in so much rich detail about the Marble Cities, about the Scarlet Alliance and the rebellion that it rises up with against the government. And not only is there a lot of political thriller type aspects involved, there's also a lot of scientific technology, there's a lot of enhanced abilities and powers. And of course, when I was working on these powers, I wanted them to be believable. I wanted them to be sometimes shocking, but I wanted them to stray from the stereotypical normal powers. Now, of course, that's hard to do. There's been so many enhanced individuals throughout different films. And it's interesting to think about the superhero genre as more than just people in capes. It's people that have been given highly enhanced abilities, and that extends into a lot of different genres, actually. A lot of different people that have more than the status quo level of power from unnormal, unusual means. And I've wanted to rely on some of the tendencies of what we think about with superheroes, but also show that there's so much more that can be offered in this concept. Now, when we're talking about Sentinels Underground, I wanted to talk you guys through some of the highs and the lows that I've been having with this rough draft. Don't worry when I mention the lows. I'm still incredibly encouraged by this rough draft. But as the name implies, it's a rough draft. There's going to be some mistakes. If it was perfect at the start, that would set me above and beyond where I'm at right now. But I don't have to have it perfect at the start. At least with my style of writing, as I'm writing, try to be very focused and clear, not having to allow a ton of mistakes just because I can allow them. But at the same point in time, usually when I'm writing a rough draft, I don't go through and edit 2, 3, 4 times through what I've just written. I'll write something, maybe look back over it once to see if I can catch any obvious mistakes or aspects that don't make any sense, and I'll continue writing because I want my ideas to flow naturally. And sometimes you can piggyback off your first idea and just think of a second very quickly. Now, other times, and this gets me into the tough scene I'm going to be talking about, you try it, you don't really like what you're trying, or you try to start and you get a little bit confused about the messaging you want to tell with this scene. So I mentioned it previously in the first author's update, I believe, but there's a battle scene which I'm going to be working on eventually, but right now I feel like I don't have all the pieces perfectly together, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, especially for the start of this rough draft. Now, I don't want you guys to be so scared of a scene that you never get back around to it, but I have plenty of plans of what to do with this scene. I have plenty of ideas, but they're not set in stone yet, and I'm not 100% sure how I want these ideas to come together. So that being said, I've written up to the start of the battle, but even looking back at how I'm trying to introduce the start of the battle, that's one area that I know, and I've almost made a mental bookmark of it in chapter 16, I believe, of this rough draft, where I know chapter 16 is an area that I'm going to need to go back to and put a lot of work into, because I've written maybe a quarter of the chapter to introduce up to the battle, but as I fine-tune what this battle is going to look like, I then also need to fine-tune the introduction into that battle. So you might call it a cop-out or cheating to skip the hardest part, but I don't view it that way. I think people get so tense when writer's block is even mentioned that they freeze up and they get scared and they say, I have to plow through this scene, write something I'm not happy with, spend a lot of time on this scene, feel bad afterward, but then I can move on and then I can deal with it in editing. But I don't think that's the case. I think skipping a scene is totally acceptable, but I do want to caution you not to just skip every scene that's a little bit tricky or a little bit intricate. Because if you skip 20 scenes, that's a lot you have to go back through and remember, what were my ideas about this? Why did I have this scene at all? Trying to search through your notes and your plot lines and figure out, what am I even trying to do in this scene? Where are the characters even at in the story? And that can get really confusing. So as best as you can, I would try to limit yourself to maybe 2 or 3 or 4 at most scenes that by the time you're done with the entire story, you can go back, familiarize yourself with the context of where the characters are at, and then roll up your sleeves and get to work. And surprisingly enough, with most of the scenes that you have that you might have trouble with, once you just start putting pen to paper, sometimes it'll jog your mind, jog your memory and your ideas, and you'll begin to think of solutions for problems, maybe even problems you didn't know that you had. Sometimes it's not that simple. Sometimes you put pen to paper and it doesn't work. Try it again. Try it a second time or a third time You might be surprised. And I think that no one has to give up on a scene. And if it is that challenging of a scene that doesn't make any sense with the rest of the story, maybe it's one that's fine to cut out. But if it's a very necessary scene and you can see why it would matter a lot to the characters who are going through it, or why it would matter a lot to the reader, that can be something you don't want to compromise on. It can be so helpful to them that you don't want to lose it just because it's challenging. Now, I think something can be important to the reader for the right or the wrong reasons. If you're giving an exposition dump and you're having trouble with how do I cram as much information as possible into 4 paragraphs that are going to span 5 pages because I need each paragraph to be a page and a half long or something ridiculous like that, you might just need to slow down and come to realize when you're giving a reader a huge bulk of information, which is very different from the scene I'm working on because this is a action intense battle scene. But just for the sake of clarification, when you're trying to give the reader a lot of information, there's several ways you can do it. You can have characters talk to each other about the information. You can have events take place that then naturally reveal the information through the event, where you're showing the information, you're not just telling people about it. Or if it needs to be something that's just told about, then you can break up those chunks to several different points between action, between character moments, between the journey, maybe the questing from one destination to another, or maybe between a passing of time. And that can make it a little bit easier for the reader to swallow. And you also, when you have a massive amount of information to give them, want to think about what information is most crucial, what information is fluff, and how much fluff do I really need? Because if you just overwhelm your reader with tons of information, that can be annoying. Or if you just give them so much kind of useless information, they can feel a little bit cheated. Like, I think, for example, of maybe some of the more poorly written mysteries that you can think of, where there was a lot of information shown in the start or in the middle act leading toward the climax. And then you come to realize most of these clues I thought were important have no bearing at all on the mystery. And you were trying to put the pieces together and the pieces weren't lining up at all because that information wasn't really needed. So that's something I've really been balancing with Sentinels Underground, is what is the crucial information? How do I lay it out? How do I get it to the reader in the right bite-sized pieces, not massive chunks where they feel overwhelmed? Now, I want to talk quickly about one of my favorite scenes that I've written. Now, I don't want to give any spoilers, but I will say that it's funny because it's right near the hardest scene. Sometimes you wouldn't expect that, but it's not too far off from that moment. I believe it's a little bit before it. But it allowed me to draw from a lot of personal experience and emotions that I have, especially as a brother. So it talks a little bit about brotherhood, but it talks about more than just that. And I'll wait for you guys to read it, so I don't want to give it away. But I just wanted to mention it because the joy of writing will come up in some of the best moments when you're writing a rough draft. And it's okay to celebrate the work that you've done, not in a prideful manner, but in a manner of just recognizing I'm writing this project because I'm passionate about it. And I want to love the finished product. I want to be super happy with how it turned out. And I want my readers to feel the same way, because if you're feeling some of that joy, they might be feeling some of that same thing. And I was also really glad I got to include this scene, not only from personal experience, which is a great source to draw from, not the only source to draw from for creative ideas, but one tool that you can use, certainly. And I'm really glad that I got to write it because I never expected my favorite scene so far, and I'm about halfway through the rough draft, maybe a little bit farther, would be a more quiet scene, a more not relaxed scene because the emotions are so prevalent, but a beautiful scene because of the way that it takes multiple different characters and shows their underlying motivations and their underlying heart at the same time. It allows them to take a lot of grief that they have, work through it instead of hiding it, get it out on the table, and then react to it from there, help each other through the grief that they've been experiencing. So I hope you guys are super encouraged by some of the news I've been giving you to keep writing your own books. The process, almost like Pilgrim's Progress, is going to have highs and lows, ups and downs, swamps of despair, and vanity fairs, and even incredible rest points where you get to talk to shepherds of the king who are pointing you on in the right direction. I'm looking forward to talking to you guys more about amazing stories like Pilgrim's Progress, like Lord of the Rings, and getting to share my thoughts on those. And I wanted to announce that I think some of the first books that I'm going to be reviewing are actually the Narnia series by C.S. Lewis. And I'll explain more when I get to those videos, but I think those are an excellent place to start for new authors to learn a little bit about the craft of writing and learn exactly what Lewis did to make those books stand out even today. So I thank you guys so much. I hope you really enjoyed this update, and I hope you love the videos. Have a great day, guys.